Hello, Bill Scher.
Good morning, Matt Lewis.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody. Happy birthday week, Bill.
Thank you very much. Birthday was 2 days ago.
Congrats.
I spent it at my school's fourth grade family dinner.
Damn you, Bill Scher.
Actually, more importantly, it's not published. I'm not sure what's going to be published, but I've been spending the last 2 weeks on a very epic piece for Politico. You'll have no idea what it's about. It's not.
You told me. No, you've already told me.
Well, listeners don't know. Listeners don't know.
Oh, but this is like a needs to know.
That's right.
Type of situation. Right. I'm on the inner circle. I know.
Somewhat out of my usual wheelhouse, but
this is a heavy lift. What you've been charged to do.
So I'm expecting edits back today. So maybe it'll be out this weekend. I can't promise. Obviously, there's some other news in the air.
There's some other news.
Might affect when it gets published. But I've basically been up till 2 a.m. for like 4 nights in a row, trying to get this piece done. And I actually almost had it finished on my birthday, and then something else popped up, and I had to do an addendum.
I saw your wife on Facebook talked about how you wished you happy birthday and mentioned that you spent your birthday writing a piece for Politico.
So I know you're curious, Matt. I haven't had my traditional.
Yes, this is where I was going with this.
A la carte birthday, as hardcore listeners know. I'm not a slave to the tradition of birthday parties, which are never as much fun as they're made out to be.
No, they're a hassle for the guy who has the birthday.
Right. It's stress to put on. It's a lot of, rinky-dink chit-chat. Often the cake doesn't live with expectations.
And then you're the one who has to be like on, entertaining, and like making sure other people are. It's your birthday.
That's right. Who needs it? So
I think the whole paradigm of the birthday is antiquated and it needs reinvented desperately. And you've done it.
I've done it.
You've done just that.
You pick a day. You say, this whole day, I'm going to do all the things that I want to do. You lay out the schedule. You send it to your friends and family saying, I am doing these things at these times, and you're welcome to join me or not on my journey.
No pressure, too.
No pressure.
Don't feel free to not come if you don't want to, because I'm bowling. I'm going to an amusement park.
Right.
I'm eating donuts.
Whatever it is that you want to do. So I haven't done that day yet. It's going to get pushed back till next weekend because of other things on the schedule.
Beauty of this is you could do it whenever.
That's true.
Because unlike a birthday party that would require, we got to pick a date. We have to get the invitations, or we got to, and once you set that date, there's no moving it, right?
Right.
With this, there's a lot of flexibility.
That's right. I do think this year.
What about a week? How about a birthday week?
You can always try. I mean, I am sort of spreading this out actually, because I'm gonna do Aussie rules. The Australian Rules Football Grand Final is this Saturday. I'm going to have the showing at my house on Sunday, even though that's not my full day. And I may tack on a time. I like to go to used bookstores on my birthday.
Yeah.
But that is not kid-friendly. That's usually, dad alone time or dad with a few friends.
What kind of bookstores are you going to, Bill? Well, he's like...
In Western Massachusetts, Matt Lewis, there's
adult
actually
bookstores?
No.
Is that a euphemism?
But just your musty used bookstore looking for presidential biographies. That's not a place that kids really want to hang out at.
I see. Okay.
And there's quite a few in Western Massachusetts. But if you're a book fan, like, you could make a vacation just on coming here and going to used bookstores for like.
Get this! I have a book about bookstores that someone sent me.
The coffee table book about coffee tables.
Yeah, it really is. It's pictures of awesome bookstores around America. I bet you that there's some Massachusetts ones in there.
Oh, there has to be. But I do think this year for the actual day, I'm going to go kid-friendly. And I think I'm going to expand my circle of invites because I'm at the point now where the the amount of time I see other parents is more than I see my other friends.
At some point. And look, this happens. I do feel like when you get married, that's step one. And then you have kids, that's step two. Like, it's really hard to keep those. Like, if there's people who are like single and you're married with kids, at some point it gets, you don't have that much in common anymore.
I mean,
so you have
things haven't deteriorated that much. I mean, but I have a circle of friends here, some with kids, some without kids. But even those with kids, they're not the parents in my kids' school that I see at drop off and pick up and at the PTO events and all that kind of thing. So it's like a group of people that I see a bit more day in, day out.
I feel like you may be more involved in your kids' lives than I am. But okay.
Well,
you're saying that they get dropped off.
I did the carnival last. I put an entire carnival.
I know.
An enormous success, by the way.
By the way, I'm in Austin, Texas, and I had dinner last night with John and Christy Spates. I think you may know Christy, who sends her regards and commented about how you're a better Christian than most Christians,
right.
And you're more family values, community oriented. So we had a whole discussion about you over dinner last night.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And was there a pushback?
No, I think everyone was in agreement on this. It was, yeah.
Anyway,
I went to this great place, Goodall's Kitchen. If you're ever in Austin, if you find yourself in Austin, Texas, I'm here for these
the one time I was in
Texas
Austin,
Tribune Fest.
One time I was in Austin, I went to Threadgill's and had the chicken fried steak, which is phenomenal. Sure, a couple other. There was a good ice cream place I went to, but the names escaped me. But the biggest thing was the chicken fried steak.
This is a nice town.
There's a big barbecue place on the outskirts, something Market.
I don't know. I
has Market in the name.
It's like called Rudy's Barbecue, which is at a gas station.
No, it wasn't that.
Is my barbecue place down here?
I feel like it has a German name.
I'm thinking about trying to see if I can obtain some of these Beto O'Rourke yard signs. Because I feel like I could fetch a good price for them up in D.C.
You're really trying to burn your conservative club card.
No, this is entrepreneurial. Like, remember how people used to smuggle blue jeans into the Soviet Union and you could sell them? I bet you I could get $20-$25 for a Beto sign right now in D.C.
You know what I learned on my birthday this year is that not only do I have the same birthday as Beto O'Rourke, he is my exact age.
Oh, wow.
And this is the worst part of being in your 40s, when you start seeing people who are your age becoming vastly more successful than you.
Dude, no, I think you're looking at this entirely the wrong way. He is viewed as young and hip and cool, and he's exactly your age. But that's a good thing.
You're twisting the knife, Matt. The point is, at our age, he is the youngest, hippest, coolest Senate candidate that might turn an entire state blue. And
yeah.
I'm sitting on a couch pillow talking to you.
No, I think you're looking at it wrong. First of all, don't discount the fact that what we're doing is pretty friggin' awesome. Let's be upfront about that.
Okay, I got to break in, Matt, with the breaking news.
Oh, what do you got?
Jeff Flake says, after hearing more than 30 hours of testimony from Judge Kavanaugh earlier this month, I was prepared to support his nomination based on his view of the law and his record as a judge. In fact, I commented at the time that he had been nominated in another era, he would have likely received 90-plus votes. When Dr. Ford's allegation against Judge Kavanaugh surfaced 2 weeks ago, I insisted she be allowed to testify before the committee moved to a vote. Yesterday, we heard compelling testimony from Dr. Ford, as well as a persuasive response from Judge Kavanaugh. I wished I could express confidence that some of my colleagues have conveyed about what either did or didn't happen in the early 80s. But I left the hearing yesterday with as much doubt as certainty. That doesn't tell me anything. I'm sure I'm missing part of the statement here, because someone tweeted above it saying Flake's a yes.
He's yes on Kavanaugh. Okay.
Yeah.
He will vote for him.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal, right? And so
I don't know if you heard my disgusted wife in the background there.
Oh yeah. I guess Murkowski and Collins we need to know where they are, right? And then if they're yes, if one of the two of them is a yes, then I guess it's game on. Hang on, someone just I'm getting a tweet here. Breaking. Oh, Flake will confirm Kavanaugh. Okay.
Right. Well, so Flake is on the committee, so you needed Flake's vote to get a positive vote in committee. Although even with
can you still see me? Did I mess up my screen?
I see you fine.
Yeah, he has to get out of the Judiciary Committee.
But Clarence Thomas had a tie vote in committee, and they moved him to the floor anyway. So I mean, you can move to the floor with a negative recommendation if you want to, and McConnell probably would, so long as he felt he had the votes otherwise.
But this suggests that Flake isn't just a vote on committee, but is a yes vote on the floor. It's a big deal,
right? He could still lose in theory if you lose to Republicans and Democrats are united. I personally are not. I'm not predicting that. Before I get on my high horse about this, because this is the conservative story. This is a window into the conservative soul, is it not, Matt?
Oh my gosh! Don't let me be the window. So it sounds like a prayer. Yeah, no, I mean, I've actually been following this pretty closely because I actually earned my paycheck this week from the Daily Beast. With writing, I wrote a lot this week, and I wrote 2 columns. I watched. So in the morning when Dr. Ford testified, I wrote a column about that, and then in the afternoon when Judge Kavanaugh testified, I wrote a column about that, and both columns went like this: "Wow, that was really persuasive." And I'm not being sarcastic. I really felt like both of them really did a good job, and they were both neither of them wavered at all. There was not even a shadow of doubt that either of them presented about their story. There's also the intangibles, the body language. Do you get a sense this person's telling the truth? I felt like they were both telling the truth. And then there's the emotional part, right? And so I think obviously Dr. Ford was going to have an advantage when it came to not just sort of talking about facts and logic, but kind of moving us viscerally. And I thought Kavanaugh really did a good job of not matching her, but of displaying some emotion. And I think Kavanaugh also realized that he had an audience of about 7 or 8 people, including Jeff Flake, including Donald Trump. And I think that when he talked about he sort of hinted about that this is going to be setting a precedent, and what goes around comes around. And I think that was very compelling, not to people watching on TV, but to people in the U.S. Senate who are worried about the precedent and the presumption of innocence, and also the institution, and then also the fact that they may someday find themselves on the wrong side of an accusation. So that's why, and I was up early this morning on NPR's Morning Edition, predicting that I think he will be confirmed, based on the fact that I think they both, it was essentially, I think it was a tie yesterday. And in the court of public opinion, I think that the tie goes to Ford. But in terms of the confirmation in the U.S. Senate with Republicans having a majority, I think a tie means status quo, which means Kavanaugh will be confirmed.
Well, I agree with you in your political analysis. This whole time, I didn't think Republicans were going to throw away a court seat, not being confident that they could swap him out in time before Democrats might take over the Senate in January, and they certainly have to be treating that as a real possibility. But I was surprised at first to hear the tone that Kavanaugh struck.
Yeah, me too.
Because everything leading up to that moment on the Republican side I mean, quite everything, but most everything was trying to be extra careful.
Yeah.
She needs to hear. We need to hear her story. I mean, there was a bit of a dig, like, and then we're going to vote anyway. But she needs to be heard. We're not even going to ask questions ourselves. We're going to bring in a ringer to ask the questions for us.
The ringer was a ringer for Dr. Ford. I felt like that. Basically, that in hindsight, now having seen the whole thing, I think it was wise that they had this ringer.
Well,
but
it was
if you'd asked me at noon after Dr. Ford testified, but before Judge Kavanaugh testified, I would have told you that cross-examination only made Dr. Ford look more credible.
But it wasn't a cross. She wasn't there to do a cross. She wasn't there to destroy Ford. She was
clearly not.
She was there to do no harm. Make sure no crotchety old white guy says something condescending, says something obnoxious, creates a meme that blows this, out of the water. Yeah. Let's have someone come in, ask her a bunch of, pointless questions that doesn't get us in any trouble, and then we'll move on to Kavanaugh.
I mean, her basically biggest gotcha question is like, are you really afraid of flying? Or, that was like the one thing, like, you say you're afraid to fly, but I'm not so sure. You seem to do a lot of air travel. Like, that was the one kind of, like, that's nothing.
Right.
But I think you're right. I think you're totally right.
But so considering that they're trying to be extra careful.
Yeah.
I thought Kavanaugh would come in.
Yep.
Relatively chill. I respect what Dr. Ford had to say. My heart goes out to how she has been dealing with this for all these decades. I have no reason to doubt her credibility, but all I can tell you is I did not do this, and go from there. And so for him to come in, with the most obnoxious possible approach, dripping with condescension, dripping with
I think we see that part a little differently. But I agree with you, Bill. I expected him to go in there with an attitude of like, whatever you do, don't get mad, and you have to come across as nice, and he. So I was also surprised by the tact that
shouldn't Kavanaugh smiled more, Matt? Shouldn't he smile?
I'll tell you what's interesting. The first, 2 weeks ago or whatever, 11 days ago, whenever he was doing the original confirmation hearing, he came across as a phony to me back then. Yesterday, he was more authentic. I believed him.
I would 100% disagree. I thought this.
Well, this may be a Rorschach test.
Yeah,
this may be a Rorschach. But the other thing I would say is, in addition to the fact that I felt like he was more authentic yesterday, maybe that's just me, right? My perception. Though I think he also needed to convince Donald Trump not to cut him loose.
Well, right. Well, not just Trump.
That is what Trump likes.
And not just Trump. I mean, I part of the reason to do this show, not just for you and me, but for the audience, that we don't caricature the other side, right? And I don't think I walk around with a caricature of conservatives in my head, most of the time. But when I was watching it, I was saying to myself, this is exactly what the base wants. Not just what Trump wants, but the broader base. They want the fire. They want to stick it in their eye. They want to dump all over all the emotion that Dr. Ford brought to the country and make sure you forgot about it as soon as possible. They don't care if Kavanaugh's poll numbers are below 50%. They just want to keep that base lined up, put maximum pressure on Collins and Murkowski, and get him through. With damn the consequences.
No, let me jump in. I think you're right, sort of, but I don't think it's as nefarious. Okay, so I agree that I think what the conservative base wants is a fighter who is going to stand up and push back against allegations from 36 years ago that there is no evidence for. I think they're tired of conservatives trying to play nice and they want a fighter. They want someone who's going to push back. I don't think but where I think we slightly differ is the framing. I think that this is righteous indignation. Conservatives believe that he is innocent. They believe that he is being railroaded. They believe that this has been happening since Robert Bork and Clarence Thomas. And yes, they want someone who's going to fight. But I see it maybe a little nobler, that desire for a fighter. I see it as like a little more nobler maybe than you do.
I mean, this is the court. I mean, the court's also supposed to be a bunch of fighters. They're supposed to be people who are going to coolly reason and assess what's constitutional and not constitutional. He treated this like a political fight.
But they treated Robert Bork and Clarence Thomas like a political fight. And the way that Dianne Feinstein rolled this, I think that a lot of the anger and that conservatives have is not the allegations. It is the fact that the way that it came out after the hearings, that there's this sense that isn't proof that it's rigged.
Well, I mean, I do want to discuss sort of the 40-year run-up to this, 30-year run-up to this, because I think that is important. But I do want to dwell first on what Kavanaugh thought he had to do and why I think it's going to work. I mean, but you're looking at it as an authentic manifestation of this 30-year story, as well as personal, a sincere personal defense of his own integrity.
We didn't start the fire,
right?
Is basically.
But just to keep this to Kavanaugh himself for a few minutes. When this allegation first came out, I'm very willing to think about other possibilities. I think it is possible that Dr. Ford sincerely and acutely felt she was on the verge of being raped and killed.
Yeah.
And carried that for decades. And at the same time, Bill, it may be that
you've made a point. You just made a point that I think I've actually been afraid to bring up. But I think that if you held a gun to my head and said, "What happened?" If you held a gun to my head and said, like, "What do you really believe happened?" And I had to say, I think this event did happen. In the sense of, I think they were drunk.
Right.
I think that they were probably taking some liberties, but she may have perceived that I'm about to be raped, and they may have never had any intent to do that. Yeah, that's such a dangerous and scary thing.
I think that is a possible
for a dude.
Possible scenario to have occurred. That they were disrespecting her. They were obviously putting her in a situation she wasn't choosing to be in. So I'm not saying it makes it in any way okay.
And that in and of itself could be this. You could argue that in and of itself is. I mean,
it would be battery. It'd be some kind of battery, if not sexual assault. But
if Kavanaugh, I mean, and I'm sorry to keep interrupting and to keep playing this out, but he may have been so drunk he doesn't remember it.
Right. Absolutely.
And if that were the story, he could not tell that story. Don't you agree that if he tried to explain that story, hey man, she's just overreacting, we were just having some fun, like that's not. I
think he could have, and I don't know. Like, let's grant that the Trump philosophy, deny.
Yep. And I would say the Bill Clinton philosophy too. This is the philosophy that works, actually.
By and large, yes. I mean, by and large, yes. And so I understand.
Concede nothing.
I understand the political efficacy of doing that. But if that is the case here, it's not honorable.
No,
it's not what you want.
It means he's been lying. If that happened, it means he's been lying. No, I think you could sort of try to rationalize it and say, look, this is a guy who did not have the intent to do anything like he's been accused of. And he was 17, and 36 years have passed, and he's been an honorable, upstanding citizen ever since then. And the last minute, they're pulling this, he's got to do what he's got to do to get confirmed. I mean, I'm not saying that that's justifiable, but that's an explanation.
Right. So before yesterday, like, I was willing to think, okay, maybe there's a 10% chance, 50% chance of this happened, but not and not to disregard
something.
Something happened, and maybe Kavanaugh.
She believes something happened.
Something happened, and was in Kavanaugh's head was not what Dr. Ford thought was in his head. I gave a possible credence to that, but for him to come out and be like, "Oh, that's not what boofing means. Oh, Renate alumni, that's not what that means." I mean, it was deny on every. I've never been blackout drunk. I've never done this. I've never done that. I've never been in that situation. I mean, that is out of the deny playbook. That is not out of the I'm gonna be straight up honest with here and let the chips fall where they may playbook.
Right.
So I did not see this as a great moment of authenticity on his part. I thought it was manufactured outrage. I mean, even when he's saying this is a circus, it's like, how can I replicate high tech lynching even though I'm not black? What word can I use? I'm going to say circus.
I mean, just to back up, when I was talking about the authenticity, I'm mainly talking about his opening statement, not the sort of cross-examination. Okay, so I just want to be clear about that part. But my overall feeling was that opening statement, where he surprised the heck out of me by coming out swinging essentially and going after Democrats, that surprised me, and I think it actually was much more authentic than the Brett Kavanaugh from 2 weeks ago.
I think he's authentically mad at Democrats. I think he's authentically mad that his name will be synonymous with this for the rest of his life. But I don't think. I mean, again, I can only speak from someone watching it on TV, and I didn't even watch the whole thing. I'm only getting snippets. I
have to say though. So this is what I said on NPR's Morning Edition or whatever this morning, right? So like, when I watched Dr. Ford, I came away believing that at the very least she believes her story, and I do not think she was faking it or making it up. And when I watched Kavanaugh, I came away thinking he did not do this thing that he's been accused of, and then so. And the thing is, like, it's hard to say what makes you, we all bring in sort of biases into it, and whether we are conscious of it or not. And you're looking at even things like body language or, all these different variables that play in. But then you go, well, this is something that happened 36 years ago. There's zero way that any evidence could really ever be. Yeah, I was listening to Adam Carolla had Mark Garagos on, the sort of famed attorney, and Garagos said that if you brought this to a district attorney, they would just be like, "There's no way we could do anything with this," and so then I think that's why I feel like at the end of the day, it was basically reverts back to where we were. And that's why I think he's going to, end up being confirmed.
So let's go back to the broader 30-year aspect of this, because in the conservative narrative, This starts with Bork. This starts with the speech that Ted Kennedy gave on the first day of the nomination, where he basically says he's going to turn the clock back to before to the Jim Crow era and the pre-Roe era. Bork. The fight over Bork is on his judicial philosophy. It wasn't about, personal transgressions, but he loses that fight. Doug Ginsburg, who follows him, does get knocked out of the box because he smoked marijuana.
Oh,
and then you get Anthony Kennedy. You go from Bork to Kennedy.
Yeah. And here we are again, replacing Kennedy.
Well, right.
Ironically.
And after that is Clarence Thomas. Obviously, we know about that episode, but of course that ends with several Democrats voting to confirm Thomas. I think it was 11 Democrats. It wasn't Biden. That we were talking about Biden's role in this a lot. Biden was a no vote, but there were 11, and that was, there's a choice to, one, not filibuster it, because that was typically not done for judges at that point. And Democrats were the margin of victory for Thomas.
Which brings us to Joe Manchin, Bill. Where's Joe Manchin on this?
Well, before we even get there, I think so after Thomas, there's also Souter. Souter, I believe, was appointed before Thomas, if I remember correctly. They're both George Bush appointments, Thomas and Souter.
I'm trying to think. I don't remember.
And
I think so.
And Souter, a lot of people on the left opposed Souter, assuming he was an anti-Roe vote. And of course, he turns out into being a pretty liberal justice. And so conservatives are mad about that. And as well as they are mad about Sandra Day O'Connor. People that were Republican appointments, and they were told they would be conservative, and they sort of drifted, or seemingly drifted towards the center when they got there, so they're mad about that. You get Bill Clinton, and you get Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was suggested by Orrin Hatch. And you also get Stephen Breyer, who was a non-controversial pick. And then you get to George Bush, and Democrats start filibustering some of the lower court judges. And the one that sticks in the Republicans' craw is Miguel Estrada. In the Republican story, they wanted to prevent him from becoming the first Latino Supreme Court justice, so they wanted to kill him before he got there. Democrats would argue he was just very right-wing, and there's documents from his time in government that they weren't coughing up. So he gets filibustered. You end up having the threat of a nuclear option on the Republican part because of some of the filibustering. That leads to the Gang of 8 or Gang of 14, which lets some through and some not through, but they stand down filibuster. And then you get Obama, where there's a lot of obstruction on the Republican side on the lower court level. By the second term, Democrats have had it. They get rid of the judicial filibuster for lower court justices. They catch up to where George Bush was. So Obama and Bush get the same amount of lower court judges. I think it's a couple judges difference. But then that ends with the Merrick Garland episode, where he doesn't get any hearing at all. Trump wins a seat that would have normally gone. And I think this is the key thing, I think, in this whole story. Garland was a compromise offering. He was not a young liberal, champion. He was 62 years old. He was considered a neutral justice. He was also recommended by Orrin Hatch. Orrin Hatch said the day before the nomination, they'll never pick Merrick Garland. They should pick Merrick Garland, and they won't because they want to rally to their base. And then they give him Merrick Garland, and immediately Orrin Hatch abandons his own pal. So there was a moment there. So I think there's two things that are important here. One is that as much as Democrats did fight certain justices, they still let most justices through. When Miguel Estrada's filibuster, they didn't say, you have to pick a liberal now. He was replaced by a conservative. So they still got a lot of conservative justices out there. The fact that Kennedy and O'Connor and Souter didn't overturn Roe, that's not the Democrats' fault. That's the judges' decision that they made. And then you get Obama saying, okay, I'm the president, you control the Senate, let's meet in the middle here and pick someone who's not just neutral, but isn't going to be there for 40 years. And Republicans say, screw that. This is war. We're still, we're not meeting, there's no truce here. This is war. We're going to rally behind the most unqualified presidential nominee possible because he is going to take a vetted list of the Federalist Society and pick from that. And damn the consequences, that's what we're getting. Do you think is that a fair description of the past 30 years?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I think it's pretty fair. The only thing, I don't think I would disagree with any of those points. The only thing I would just sort of reinforce is how deeply embedded this is in the conservative psyche. The sense that that we have been betrayed by our own Republican presidents, going back to Earl Warren, actually.
Right.
We've been betrayed by our own Republican presidents who have picked nominees who have been liberal, not just moderate, but often liberal justices. I think part of the context is that the Supreme Court has become maybe more important than the founders envisioned in terms of legislating from the bench. And so if you care deeply, let's say, about the right to life, you can understand that, it's not necessarily a legislative thing, that it's actually the Supreme Court with Roe is sort of where the action is. So I think that there's been a ratcheting up of the sense of how important the court is for conservatives. So you've got the betrayal from your own Republican presidents. You've got the sort of heightened sense that the Supreme Court is actually, these unelected, 9 lifetime appointments are super important. And then I think the last thing, which you cannot underestimate, is the history of Dems breaking the norm, breaking norms to take down conservative appointees, or try to take down conservative nominees who were highly qualified and experienced, and not just to vote against them or filibuster them, but to try to destroy their reputation with allegations. He's going to take us back to Jim Crow or whatever. So really, basically, going nuclear. I hate to use that term because it gets confused with the Harry Reid nuclear option, but kind of scurrilous attacks on these nominees. And so I think when you combine those 3 factors together, and again, this is not just a 30-year history. I think if you go back to Earl Warren, where it's a 60, maybe a 50 or 60-year history or something like that. That leads us up to where we are today. And the only thing I would say about Merrick Garland, just to sort of finish that part off, is there's no doubt at all that Merrick Garland got screwed. He's clearly qualified, clearly experienced, seems like a good guy, moderate temperament. There's no doubt he got screwed. The only thing I could say is I do think there's an argument to be said for, if Republicans had the Senate, had the majority of the Senate, they could have held hearings and they could have tried to destroy him somehow, and then they could have voted against him, and somehow that would have been viewed as more legitimate than what they did. And I wonder, I think I made the case at the time, that you could argue that it was actually more humane what Mitch McConnell did, as opposed to going through a charade of a hearing. I
mean, getting killed by lethal injection, I suppose, is better than at the guillotine.
Well, the guillotine's better than other things. So there's different gradations here.
The point of the hearings is that there's even if you're doing it disingenuously, just the fact you are having hearings and having the chance of the public to weigh in is an opportunity for people to make their own judgments and communicate to the representatives, here's what I want you to do. And they just cut that off completely and said, this is just not going to happen. And look, people on the left would say that was a breaking of the rules, and it's not. The Republicans, they're allowed to be dicks.
Yeah.
If you have the votes and you don't want to approve a Democrat's nominee, you don't have to. And if voters don't like that, they have the agency to oust their senators for behaving that way. And the fact of the matter is, in 2016, they did not punish Republicans for doing that.
Yeah. No, I agree. It wasn't against the rules, but it was a breaking of norms. And I do think, I understand why Democrats are pissed about it. And I think that Merrick Garland got screwed. I also understand why Republicans did it. And I think the story that we've just been telling about this 30, 40, 50, whatever, however many years, the context of that story is important to understand why Republicans did what they did and why they're sticking by Brett Kavanaugh today as well.
So let me ask you the tough question, Matt.
Okay.
So we know why Republicans want this seat so badly. We know why many.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is a point we haven't explicitly made. We have a smart audience, so I'm sure they get it. But this is such an important seat. Like Gorsuch, Neil Gorsuch was replacing Scalia, so that was a conservative replacing a conservative. Brett Kavanaugh would be replacing Kennedy, so that explains why Democrats are so hell-bent on stopping this. And it explains why Republicans are so hell-bent on pushing it through.
Well, remember, when Scalia died, like Garland would have taken a 5-4 conservative majority and made it, I don't think made it a 5-4 liberal majority, but probably make it a 4-1-4. We have a real, straight balance. And, I think Garland would have upheld Roe on stare decisis alone, but I really can't know that for an absolute fact. I mean, unlikely.
Well, there's never been a liberal appointee who moved to the right after they made it to the bench.
I think unlikely,
but it happens all the time with conservatives.
But on that alone, he would not have altered the court's balance on abortion, because Kennedy was upholding Roe also. Although maybe he'd calibrate a bit. Maybe there's certain restrictions Garland would be okay with and Kennedy wouldn't be okay with. But again, it's all speculative. I don't really know. With getting Gorsuch instead of Garland, you were solidifying the current makeup of the court and not tilting it what I think would be more of a balanced court. With a Kennedy to Kavanaugh, it's still a 5-4 conservative court, but potentially more so on Roe. I mean, that's the one. I don't think Kavanaugh's going to necessarily undo the gay rights opinion. But Kennedy had a socially libertarian streak that presumably Kavanaugh does not have, and therefore the court would inch to the right, maybe alert to the right, if they actually overturn Roe.
I interviewed Eric Erickson, the conservative blogger, talk show host, the other day, because he has become. I've seen this phenomenon with but with several of my friends, that the attacks on Kavanaugh, as well as Ted Cruz being chased out of Fiola by an angry mob the other day, have kind of radicalized them and made them be more pro-Trump, even though they never liked Trump. They never really. Some of my friends, Eric has always liked Kavanaugh, and Eric has always liked Cruz, but some of my friends really didn't like either of them, and the left has sort of pushed them back into their, partisan.
Let's get to the question I want to ask you.
Okay.
You're sort of answering it for what your other friends think, but is this worth it? If you're going to get this seat, people who made the bargain with Trump, who don't love Trump, don't love his mannerisms, don't love him on trade, don't love what he does with Russia, but they'll swallow it to get the judges. Having seen what you are putting up with, what you are burdening yourself with to get Kavanaugh in this seat, do you think that price is a price worth paying?
All right, I have two questions first before I answer that.
Okay.
First, are we starting with the caveat, which is I'm operating under the presumption of innocence? As far as I know, Brett Kavanaugh is innocent. He may be. There's a perception that he's involved in stuff, and that could hurt Republicans from an optics standpoint. But we're assuming that he's innocent.
Let me put it this way. Whatever you think of his innocence or guilt,
okay,
it is indisputable that this process has been even more polarizing than anyone might have thought. That the image of Republicans as disregarding of sexual assault, the surly presentation that he gave, it only adds this notion of Republicans that we just don't care.
There could be electoral consequences.
Right.
Their branding, how do people perceive the Republican Party? All those things. Yes. Okay.
So second question. You have to carry that perception to get this seat.
Got it. Okay. So that's the best. So you get the seat, but you've got the baggage of the perception of just all the negative stereotypes.
Correct.
My second question for you, when you say, is it worth it? Let's say I say no. When do we go back? Are you saying we go back to 2016? And the question is, should Hillary have won? Or do we go back to, should Republicans have nominated Rubio? Or do we go back to 2 weeks ago? Is it worth, like, where does this start, this scenario?
Well, I mean, we can't turn back the clock. I would think it's.
So you're saying today?
Is it worth some introspection that we as conservatives have been so singularly focused on controlling the court in like having a generally 5-4 conservative court isn't good enough. We have to have it all. We have to win every possible culture war battle on the court, and everything else should be deprioritized towards that goal. Is having that mentality good for the Republican Party, for the conservative movement? Once we achieve what we looks like we're about to achieve, if you make the decision like, maybe this isn't worth it. Maybe it's okay to not win every single Supreme Court battle, so we can look our other fellow Americans in the eye who we don't agree with everything and say, you know what, we can at least come together to try to stop this scourge of sexual assaults in our country.
All right. Well, look, I would say, if you believe that Brett Kavanaugh is guilty, is a rapist, then it is not worth it. If you believe, or if you're giving the presumption of innocence to Brett Kavanaugh, and so you are operating under the assumption that he's innocent, if you believe that, then I think you have to fight like hell, because that is the state of play. This is a lifetime appointment. This is not beanbag. This is a nasty, nasty business. They are going to try to destroy your nominees and stop you from getting this lifetime appointment, which we've established has incredible power over the way we live our lives, as well as the law of the land. There will always be anything, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So anytime that you fight for something really important, you will meet resistance. If you try to accomplish something and to do something important, there will be pushback. There will be baggage. And so I don't think that it is possible to achieve something of this magnitude in this environment unscathed. I think that is what you sign up for. And assuming he's innocent, which is the assumption I'm making here, then, damn the torpedoes, and there will be consequences. And that's the business that we are in.
Well, here's where I quibble with your framing of the question, but I think it's highly relevant. There's no evidence that Kavanaugh, I'll put this in the right way. There have not been subsequent allegations that he raped people. There is no argued pattern of behavior of raping. There is an argued pattern of behavior of being highly disrespectful to women in a traumatic way that it actually affects their being over the course of their adult lives. And he was part of a culture of misogynistic behavior that's probably always
I don't think that's proven, but I think you're right. I think that when he was 16 and 17 at Georgetown Prep, I think that he probably was part of that culture, yes.
And it may well be that was high school, college behavior, and he grew up and doesn't do that anymore. But he certainly isn't doing any attempt to come to terms with what he did and make any amends for what he did. And the Republican Party, in supporting him and focusing on, is he or is he not a rapist, and that's it. They're not going through that process and saying, okay, what can we do as a society to advance from this horrible behavior that we've been winking and nodding at for so long? So that's where I think the sort of political and cultural cost to Republicans and conservatives is going to be. That we have been in the Trump, Harvey Weinstein, Me Too era. I mean, and I wrote a piece about this during the primary. You had in South Dakota, it's not well known because nobody read my piece, but in South Dakota,
I don't believe that for a second, Bill.
In South Dakota, Kristi Noem, who won the Republican primary for South Dakota governor, current congresswoman, she was charging her opponent with not respecting a woman's truth who worked under him, who was alleging sexual misconduct in the workplace. And he was running as the bigger Trump supporter than she was. And she won that primary in a very conservative state of South Dakota. So I do think that the Me Too era was having bipartisan ramification, bipartisan consequence in a positive way until now.
Yeah. No, look, Bill, I think, as you know, I wanted them to pick Amy Coney Barrett. I mean, I was one of her biggest cheerleaders, and I think Republicans should have gone that way. And we may still be having, we might now be having a question about the people of faith or whatever the Catholic religious order she was a part of. Like, I think the liberals would have come after her and tried to portray her as some sort of Sarah Palin religious fanatic, but it would at least be a different conversation. I thought they should have picked Barrett. And I do not dispute the point that you're making. There will be consequences for, assuming that Kavanaugh is confirmed, there could be consequences to the institution of the Supreme Court. There could be a lot of consequences for the Republican Party and the conservative movement. And you're asking me if it's worth it. And I'm saying, again, based on the assumption of innocence here, the presumption of innocence, from a purely strategic standpoint, that there are trade-offs in everything you do, is it worth it? From a calculated standpoint, I say yes.
All right. I will give you the last word, Matt Lewis.
All right, buddy. Well, again, happy birthday.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to the Politico magazine piece. And
very exciting.
I want to hear the next time we meet. I don't know if you have done the birthday week, but or the birthday day.
It won't be by our next show. It'll be 2 shows from now.
So this is something for the people to look forward to.
I will know the winner of the Oscar Rules Grand Final, which is because the actual final is this Saturday. So usually I'm watching it 2 months later. So to actually watch it on the same weekend is a special treat.
And we'll probably know what happens to Brett Kavanaugh, which we do not know. We're taping. I should have probably said this numerous times that we are taping this Friday morning. What is it? 9:30 Eastern time, something like that.
10:10 now.
Okay. So we see through a glass darkly. I do want to shamelessly plug. I interviewed Bill Kristol live from the Texas Tribune Festival in Austin, Texas.
So we actually took our Texas now.
I'm in Texas right now. I was in Anaheim earlier this week. Now I'm in Texas. I've been gone for a week. So if my audio isn't as good and my video isn't as good, and if I look a little more sleep deprived, and you know why. But I interviewed Bill Kristol on the Matt Lewis and the News podcast live from Austin, Texas. Do check that podcast out. We talked about Brett Kavanaugh. We talked about Beto O'Rourke versus Ted Cruz. We talked about the legacies of Charles Krauthammer and John McCain. And we talked about the dream that he and I have of this Nikki Haley, Ben Sass Republican ticket. Don't laugh. Let us dream, Bill. Check it out.
All right. We'll talk to you next week here on the DMZ.
All right. See you guys.